Hello, I'm Dan Gibson and welcome to the second video in this series, the Qibla story. In the first video, we looked at the Qibla. What is it? What evidence do we have that Muslims originally prayed towards Jerusalem? There is evidence in books, but there is no archaeological evidence, was our conclusion. And the evidence in books was all written 200 to 300 years after the Qibla change took place. Then we looked at the Petra Qiblas and over 20 mosques that appear to face towards the city of Petra. Again, we're doing an overview. If you want to look at exact things, if you want to study them, look at the Qibla tool on the website or go to the book Early Islamic Qiblas and look there. But the website is probably the most current. We're trying to keep the most current information on the website, although it is hard because we keep getting emails and discovering new things and are checking things out all of the time. Okay. Now we're going to come up to a chart that I have drawn. I've put it on the map for you. And this looks at the time starting about 700 AD. Now, 700 AD is actually 81 AH, after the Hijrah. So we have jumped ahead 81 years into the history of Islam, and now we're going to pick it up around 100 AD, and we're going to look at what happens because the Qibla suddenly splits into three different things that appear. So we have the Petra, actually four, because we have the Petra Qiblas, and they continue on. There are still mosques who are being built even on into later dates. And so on my computer, I'm going to start this up. So here we go. On the Qibla tool, we can see that even into the 700s, 705, we have the Sana Mosque, and you're working with Al-Aqsa in 709, Walid 712, Khirbat al-Mafjar 714, Anjar 714, and Qasr al-Kastal in 20, even Qasr Mashata in 743, and so forth. So these, and I have some others that are, if you notice here, they're just, we don't know, we know about the century they were built in, we don't know the exact date. But you can see that the Petra continues on at least until 743, and I would say, we can safely say about 750, so another 50 years, that mosques are being built where the Qibla seems to face the city of Petra in southern Jordan. But something else takes place. So let's go back to our chart here, and you will see as we're coming down, the first thing that takes place, and this is the bit that gets everything going, and that bit is the what we call the between mosque, and it all starts with the first name on the top of the list. 706 is Hajjaj, General Hajjaj, and he builds a mosque. Now, Hajjaj, we've given his story in other videos. He starts out as a school teacher. He graduates up. He goes off to Damascus. He becomes a leader in the bodyguard of the Caliph. He makes his way up until he is actually appointed to go down to the city that is rebelling against him. We believe it's the city of Petra. And he goes to the holy city. He's told, don't destroy the city, don't kill people in the sacred place, but please go down and put the rebellion down. And so he goes down there, but he writes back and says, I need permission, and he gets permission. He goes in, and there's a bloody battle that takes place between General Hajjaj and the Ibn Zubair and others who are protecting the holy city. We see this all, according to the Qiblas, we see this all taking place in the city of Petra. In the end, General Hajjaj is victorious. He has put down the rebellion, but it's a bloody affair. People are killed in the sacred area. The Kaaba building gets destroyed from a Manjanic, which is throwing these rocks in, and so forth. So the city is in a miserable place. Hajjaj goes in, and he's rather disappointed. At least that's the way I take it, from the city, because it's full of idols. It's full of temples to other gods, and it's full of all these things, and in the middle of all of this is the Kaaba, which is now destroyed. And during that war, Ibn Zubair apparently grabs the black rock and he moves it down to the deserts of Saudi Arabia. He goes out in the desert, probably to a place where there was a valley, a well into it, and his people go there and they settle there. And because they have the black rock, they begin to pray. They continue. They are religious. They are seeing themselves as defending the religion of Islam, and eventually they began to put that rock into a Kaaba building. They begin facing it, and then you begin getting the different, how would I describe this? The records of different pilgrimages taking place at the same time in Islamic history. Very unique that there would be several different pilgrimages, several different people leading them, and it seems to us from looking at the Qibla directions we see in archaeology that this is taking place in different places. And so you have a rival city, and so the very first city was what we call Petra today. That was called different things, and we have a paper you can look at, all the different names the city of Petra goes by, and we even have some people who have recorded that that city also went by the name of the mother of all cities was one of them. That's in the Petra Scrolls, which are the books there we'll look at in another series. It was called many different interesting names, but it was also called the city of Mecca by some of the people who lived there, and especially by the pagans who were in the city. And so it was what I would call Mecca number one. The Romans called it Petra, and so forth. Then they called it was also called the mother of all cities. There's other names that were used by them, so we can identify this, but it was also called the city of Mecca. Well, once General Hajjaj had destroyed the city, then he went on and he went down to Medina, and he destroyed a lot of things there and set up new governors. He ended up going back over into Iraq, and there he married the daughter of the Caliph, so he's now the son-in-law of the Caliph, and he is given the control, the Eastern Command, so all of the eastern part of Arabia and over into Iraq, he is put in control. So there are, the Caliph is at the top. He has several men underneath him who are leading different sections of the empire, and Hajjaj is there. And Hajjaj decides to build a monumental mosque, a great mosque that where he would pray at, which would be his mosque, and it would be known as his mosque. And so he begins to build this mosque. Now, the question comes here of dating. And so when you look at the list that I've put up, I've got 706 for this mosque. I'm just going to pull down on my thing here, but actually it says here 706 construction was started, but actually construction started in 702. I'm just looking at my timeline in the back of Quranic Geography. It's a very handy timeline. So in 702, Hajjaj begins to build this mosque. So this is back in 83 after the Hijrah. So this is not long after the war. He begins to construct his mosque. And he chooses a very interesting Qibla. He doesn't face towards Petra, as all of the mosques had done so far. He doesn't face towards Mecca, which is the new direction that is being offered and where people should pray to. He chooses a different location, and he calls it the Wasat Mosque. Wasat in Arabic stands for between, or the middle. The middle or the between. So it's between two positions, or it's the middle of these. So depending on the word here, the word can be used as either way. It is the middle one. It is the between one. And so he has this between Qibla that he sets, and he points it between the two. And it's very interesting that mosque is completed in 706, and he has this Al-Walid, the Caliph, allows him to do it. And remember, he's married to this is his son-in-law, who's a very powerful military commander at this time. And so he allows his son-in-law to point his mosque towards the middle one. Well, that starts something. And you will see in these three columns here that it's not, we can't find the first mosque that pointed to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. We don't know. We can find one in 727 that points there. And not long after 730 in the Amman Citadel, the palace there, it chooses a Qibla that is towards Mecca. And a few years later, the Mosque of Mansur, which the Abbasids build over in Baghdad, it faces towards Mecca, and then the list goes on. And after that, they start out infrequently, and they get more frequently until Mecca is the choice everywhere. What is interesting is this between thing, because obviously they start building other mosques at this time, and during the time that General Hajjaj is in control, this is over a 66-year period, mosques are built to face the between position, and we can choose that over here on our map. We can look at the between position. I'll just flash the picture up, but it gives us the number of those mosques, and there's a bunch of them here. I haven't counted them, so I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20. Again, more than 20. So we have more than 20 that point to Petra. Now we have more than 20 mosques that face the between position. And they're all built in a 66-year period. Now, there's a whole slew of them being built right at the beginning. And so in those first few years, many of these mosques are being built. Many of them are being constructed. I have the dates of their completion up here. But this is not the when they were begun, but rather the completion of these mosques. And so some of them were built over a 10-year period or more. But as we look at this, you'll notice in 715 General Hajjaj dies, but the mosques are not all completed. And so over the next few years, many of these mosques are completed, maybe even begun and completed. Obviously, the between position was quite well accepted in the Eastern Empire that Hajjaj was in control of. In the end, however, the Qibla, the between Qibla, was abandoned after Hajjaj dies and different things happen, and so it disappears, and the Qibla has been changed. Now, later historians who are writing about this, and they're not very much later, because Islamic rule in 750, remember we said 50 years, in 750 the Abbasid rule begins. And so now the Abbasids take over. Now mosques point to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. We don't have any mosques before this time well, we have a couple. So I'll just back up. We have a couple of mosques before this time who point, under the Umayyad time, points to and prays towards Mecca and Saudi Arabia, including that mosque on the Amman Citadel, the palace there. So it's not the mosque, it's the palace, but the whole building is oriented towards Mecca and Saudi Arabia. So there is some, under the Abbasids, as they're breaking up, not the Abbasids, sorry, under the Umayyads, their theology seems to be breaking up. There are people pointing or facing different directions at the end of their control. And so when the Abbasids come in, they stepped down pretty hard on this whole thing, and they tried to clean it up, and so the between mosques disappear, and the other mosques start to face Mecca and Saudi Arabia. You even get places like the Wasit Mosque, the between mosque, they actually go in and destroy this mosque, knock it all down, level the ground, but they leave the foundation. They level the ground over and above it. Knock all the buildings down, level up, and they rebuild the mosque facing Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And it's not until the 1930s that archaeologists are digging, and they are looking at this mosque and the ruins of this early mosque, and they discover underneath it is a previous mosque, and its Qibla points somewhere out into the middle of Saudi Arabia. And without realizing it, it comes evident this is a between mosque. There's a lot of arguing at the first. This must point to Jerusalem, and you'll find a lot of articles talking about this mosque. The early mosque pointed to Jerusalem, and so many people measured it and tried it, and it does not point to Jerusalem. It doesn't even point to Petra. It points to a between position. And so I'm the one who came along some years ago, lined this up and said, look, there is a between position. It started with the between mosque, and there is even records of the written by the Abbasids a few years later, saying one of the great misdeeds of Caliph Walid and his family, referring to his daughter and his son-in-law, General Hajjaj, one of their great misdeeds was the setting of the between Qibla, or the Wasit Qibla. This was one of the great misdeeds of this Caliph. And so it's pinned on Al-Walid. He's the one who allowed all this to happen during his reign, which actually brought down the Umayyads in the end. They're disagreeing with each other, and they gave the rise to the Abbas family, who came from Humayma, which is near Petra. They had the people from Muhammad's family with them. They show up and they fight and they take over and say, we are the real family, we are based on the real thing, and so forth. But something happens, and I've got it over here. I'll slide it over. I want you to notice some events that take place here just beforehand. In 708, to go back here to when we're looking at the between mosque, but in 708, that's when the mihrab is introduced. That's the little circle, what do you call it, arch, whatever's on an arch, that shows the direction of prayer. So when you're in a mosque, you're looking, there's a niche cut into the wall, a round one, and people face, that says that's the Qibla direction. Before this, there was just a straight wall. It's not until 708. So I think back then there is already a question of, should we pray towards Mecca? They're not rebuilding mosques in 708. They're introducing the mihrab, and they're putting this niche into the walls of mosques. And the first one that is done in Medina, even though the general there, the governor there is not happy with what they're doing. They put the niche, they changed the Qibla wall, put a niche into it, and show that they're praying towards Mecca. So we have Mecca on one side, we have Hajjaj with his between on the other. And so that's in 708 or 89 after the Hijrah. So, but mosques are still being built towards Petra at the same time as I go down. Now in 710, that's not very much later, 91 after the Hijrah, Khalid al-Qasri, he is appointed as governor of the Holy City. And he's very strict, and he enforces unpopular views on people. And so it talks about, this guy came along and he changed things. He made things unpopular. Khalid insisted that the caliph's interpretation of history and religion were correct. If there's any question about history, or if there's any question about religion, then the caliph's word stands. It's almost setting him up like a pope. And when you have a question, he can stand up and speak, and whatever he decides, whatever he says, that is what the religion agrees to follow. So the caliph at that point is put in charge of religion and interpreting religion and history. Very, very important, because the caliph is now taking the lead. He says what goes on. Before this, there were the religious community that would gather and the scholars, and they would discuss things. There were different schools of thought and different legal schools that had risen up and different teachings. But now the caliph is insisting he can interpret history and religion. Why history? Because there's this confusion that's going on. Which direction do we pray? Mosques are pointing here, mosques are facing here, mosques are facing here. And so the caliph says the final word. And that's when that idea is introduced by Khalid al-Qasri, who is the governor of Mecca, and he insists on this. And so the caliph is set up. Now, at this very same time, we start the 7-11. Now, this is the next year. We have the start of the fight for Spain and North Africa. And so that's when this whole thing begins there. So all we've introduced so far is the introduction of the between mosques and the introduction of the Mecca mosques. On the next video, we're going to look at what about the parallel mosques? Where did that come from? Actually, it's not the next video. We have one more in between. We have a question about China, because there are some mosques that are being built in China. And people argue, scholars say it's far too early, it couldn't have happened. The next video might be quite short, but I want to share with you some of the things I've discovered chasing down the China angle. And then the following video will be about parallel and how did they ever end up with the Qiblas that they did in Spain and North Africa. This is Dan Gibson, and we've been talking about the Qibla story.